Welcome everyone. Okay, next slide, please. So here we have a picture on the left of the Ohlone territories that existed, to this day, but also before this region was conquered by settlers. And on the right, we have a map of redlining in San Jose. For those who don't know what redlining is, it was a predatory and discriminatory practice that drew maps and redlined and basically made sure that folks who lived in those areas had less access to financial services for housing. And usually these areas coincided with communities of color, low-income communities. So today we want to pause and acknowledge that here is San Jose. We live on the unceded land of the Ohlone and Muwekma people. Today we practice recognizing the original caretakers of these sacred lands. Today we recognize that the Ohlone people have never lost their connection to this land. Today we recognize our elders, past, present, and future generations. Today we recommit to continue and/or beginning the work to dismantle ongoing legacies of the systems of colonialism, racism, and oppression by institutional settlers. Today, we acknowledge the interruption of how colonization imposed white supremacy on Indigenous communities here and all over the world. The work we do in communities serves to change this and therefore honor and pause to recognize where we come from, which will help us advance in the creation of new systems for all without violence. I'm going to pass it on now to Lila.
Thanks, Tao. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy, also known as the Iroquois Confederation, holds closely the consideration of those who are not yet born, but who will inherit the world. In their decision-making, they consider how present-day decisions will impact their descendants. They're taught to respect the world in which they live as they are borrowing it from future generations. So with that in mind, we want to invite you into a creative visioning activity to start off, which we hope to imagine, which we invite you to imagine the world in which your descendants will inhabit. What does that world look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? How do living beings relate to one another? How do people inhabit the earth? I encourage you to pursue whatever medium you have available to you, whether that's drawing, writing, movement, music. I'll give you 10 minutes to begin this visionary practice. In this time, feel free to have your camera on or off as is your comfort. And after those 10 minutes, I will call everyone back and we'll break into breakout sessions to explore these visions in smaller groups. So I invite you to begin this activity. If there's any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, but we'll start those 10 minutes right now. I'll call everyone back now when you're ready, maybe finish whatever thought or line or whatever else you were working on. And if you have it available, please come back onto the camera. Okay, thanks everyone. So we're going to break you all out into breakout rooms to explore and discuss what you created with a few other people. We're going to be giving 2 different questions to 2 different groups. So keep note of whether you're an odd or an even number breakout room. And the odd number breakout rooms will respond to the question, how can the visions of each person in your breakout room come together? The even number breakout rooms will respond to the question, in the South Bay CLT, our values are to ensure that everyone is safe, loved, and housed. Are the visions aligned with the world you've created? Are they misaligned? And before responding to both of those questions, we invite you to take a few minutes, 1 minute or more, to share out your vision to the rest of your group. So we'll put that in the chat and make sure you keep in mind what number breakout room so you can respond to the appropriate question. And you'll have 10 minutes for this time, and then we'll come back to the full group and have just a few minutes to share out if folks feel called to share in the larger group. So we'll start the share out now. I wonder if maybe we can stop sharing the screen actually, Jackie, for a moment, just so that if folks want to go into gallery view and see if there's other people that want to speak up about things that came up in your breakout session or things that came up in your visioning session. Yeah, I invite you to speak up or to put some thoughts in the chat if you're interested. But I think we'll take just a few more minutes for this and then move on. Yeah, please feel free to unmute. Go ahead, Sherry.
Yeah, I really loved being in our group. And we were pretty much all on the same page. And in terms of the kind of world we want to live in and hope to get there. And one person thought about it very, very locally because it's too difficult to imagine where we're headed with climate change right now, and had a really wonderful vision of what her own land could be used for. And then we mainly looked at imagining the positive, like where could we be if we really focused on it, and looked at the whole broad spectrum of issues to be dealt with, recognizing that if we don't do something about climate change, there's not going to be a world here in 7 years.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It certainly weighs heavy, and that's why it's important to envision a different world. Does anyone else want to share, either through speaking, through the chat? Thanks, Leslie. Hey, Leslie. I'll read out. We talked about people living in interconnected community, biodiverse, small-scale agriculture, no prisons, police or policing, surveillance, less control from corporations, moving away from capitalism. Yeah, definitely all of that. From Nassim, who is in my group, a visioning session is such a great exercise, and in times when activists and advocates may feel discouraged, it is essential we keep in our sight the vision of that better world we deserve and we know is possible. From Bob Sutton, it seems some common threads are aspiration and hope for better futures. We also agree it will not be easy, and collaboration is a vital element. So many systems work against justice and sustainable futures, but we can make a strong force and show constructive ways forward. Absolutely. Cool. Well, I do other, oh yes, Danielle, go ahead.
Sorry, just want to make sure to share on behalf of the group. I think what we had agreed collectively, or what we were most responsive to, was that the exercise was actually really challenging, even to think 7 generations over, because a couple of us, Regina and I, have children, and that thinking about the challenges they face even 1 generation over gave us a little bit of anxiety, and we share that sentiment, Andy, as well. But among the things, a lot of the things we talked about, one of the things that we both all 3 of us felt strongly about was the idea of communal spaces. Like, we talked more specifically about physical environment, like how that dictates how we move and feel in different spaces. Regina shared how she has felt visiting different cities and how more or less you feel a sense of neighborhood, both like literally like the neighborhoods, and I think just I think if I'm not mistaken, Regina, what you're implying also is like just the neighborliness, more or less in varying amounts when you even step into different physical spaces. And I think our shared hope was that Andy introduced the idea, the very radical idea of everybody getting what they need. And, you know, we again shared the sentiment of that, joking that it was really a radical thing, but clearly it's not in our eyes.
Thanks so much for sharing, Danielle. Do other folks want to share? Otherwise, I think we can move on. But thank you all. Yeah, I hope that this was an activity that puts you in a space to think more creatively and expansively about what it is, the world that we can build together. Jackie, would you mind putting the slides back on? Thank you. So now we'll move, and if you could go to the next slide. Yeah, we'll move into a discussion a bit about what is restorative economics. Sorry, one minute. So with all of this visioning work that we've been doing, it's helpful to sort of, sorry, my notes are a little off. 1 minute. Yeah, the next question that is important to ask is, how do we get there? And I think it's helpful to think about restorative economics as a way not only of transforming the way the community treats and understands resources and access to those resources, but also develops a pathway for marginalized people who have been denied self-determination, political, cultural, and economic power through colonization and white supremacy. Let's hear from Nwamaka Agbo and what they have to say about restorative economics.
Restorative economics is a framework that I've been working on for the past three to 5 years. I'm really trying to understand what are the different strategies and solutions that we can implement to build a just and sustainable economy. And so restorative economics is really centered on the principle of lifting up community-owned and community-governed projects and figuring out how we can then leverage those shared community assets to advance a vision of self-determination and sovereignty, and particularly one that builds the political, economic, and cultural power of low-income communities of color.
Cool. Yeah, so essentially, restorative economics is really an invitation for communities to come together and form relationships to allow them to reimagine a new way of being grounded in cooperation instead of competition, inclusion instead of exclusion, abundance instead of scarcity. With the restorative economics approach, neighbors can come out from behind their fences, behind their walls, gather in the streets, and make decisions collectively about their neighborhoods. Restorative economics really is a concept that places the well-being of the community directly into the hands of that community and not externalizing it. And so that brings us into a conversation of what restorative economics isn't. It's helpful to view it in terms of what it is and what it is not. If you could go to the next slide, Jackie. Yeah, so here in San Jose, Google, in collaboration with the city of San Jose, is actually appropriating language around restorative economics to continue the legacy of settler colonialism that began in this place centuries ago. With the city's support, they're using what they call a community benefits plan with a pledge $200 million to sort of rationalize their otherwise $19 billion development right in the middle of San Jose. pretending that the development is something it is simply not, which is a benefit and asset to the community, rather than what it is, which is a major development that will displace large swaths of San Jose community members, that which it already has begun doing. What this community benefits plan misses is that the damages to the entire South Bay far exceed any monetary amount, and that $200 million may seem like a lot, but in reality is just a drop in the bucket for Google. The Google project has already transformed the South Bay and received far more support and resources from the city of San Jose than any true restorative economic process, such as the Community Land Trust or other important efforts as well. The community benefits plan poses as a restorative economics process, but serves as little more than a watering can in a forest fire. And that brings us to the history of the South Bay Community Land Trust, which proudly declares our continued resistance to Google's neocolonialism, locating our own origins to a desire to implement a restorative economic model in resistance to the city and Google's development plans, as well as development plans of other corporate landowners and others. Our vision of community-driven development grew out of grassroots community organizing and direct action. We led as Serve the People San Jose. We organized to prevent escalating displacement of residents driven by Google's purchase of public land by the Diridon Station area. We created and incorporated the South Bay Community Land Trust in 2019 to honor and expand this work by fully decommodifying housing and holding stable, permanently affordable housing for our community. Our goal is not only to pave the way for the future of sustained housing affordability, but to also restore, heal, and make whole the communities and places within the South Bay that have been most exploited and transformed by corporate and political greed. And that brings us into into the history of the Community Land Trust movement, which is through a restorative economics model that's long rooted in working class struggle. In the United States, New Communities, Inc. arose in the late 1960s during the civil rights movement in Georgia, and it became the first and to this day still the largest Black-owned community land trust. It pursued a vision of empowering Black people to work the land for themselves, to be self-sustaining, and to thrive in community. Internationally, during the Indian Revolution from British colonization, Acharya Vinoba Bhave, a disciple of Gandhi, led the Bhudan movement, where they solicited wealthy landowners to gift their land to local villagers and indigenous people of the area. This land was held in trust by village council and leased to local farmers. Approximately 3 million acres were redistributed by 1954. This is an example of the importance of class solidarity, where those with landed wealth and power gained through exploitation and extraction were actually returning that power and that land back to the hands of the people from whom it was taken. All of that said, it's also important to acknowledge the conflicts within this history to reveal the need to constantly criticize and complicate our own work, and to ensure that it's in direct collaboration and solidarity with local and international grassroots movements. For instance, New Communities, Inc. traveled to Israel in 1968 and learned from the Jewish Moshav settler communities that were known to uproot and remove Palestinians from their ancestral lands. Additionally, Gandhi, who was Bhave's spiritual mentor, was known to have been anti-Black and a crafter of the modern day, and part of the crafting of the modern day Hindu nationalist movement. And so this is a lesson, of course, in making sure that our movements are aligned with the movements for justice and liberation in all areas. So to move on a little bit, let's sort of go more into what actually is a community land trust. And the most basic definition is that it's a nonprofit organization led by a community that acquires land and stewards it in perpetual trust for the benefit of low-income communities and for generations to come. Community land trusts offer an alternate model of community development based on the values of radical love, of community stewardship, and transformative justice in housing, health, and our shared habitat. They have unique governance structures that really ensure that decisions that are made within the organization are community controlled, and that needs for the future of the organization are defined by the community themselves. This structure ensures that low-income residents and beneficiaries of land trust programs have an equitable seat at the decision-making table of the organization. What that looks like for our community land trust is to have 1/3 local experts, 1/3 community members, neighboring residents, and 1/3 residents of actual community land trust properties. This model ensures that land and property and housing remains within the community's hands and keeps it there for the community, not politicians, not developers, not gentrifiers, not other people outside of the community to decide what to do with it. The CLT model really asserts that community members themselves are experts of the land that they themselves inhabit. And this is related to housing decommodification, where currently housing and land are seen as a commodity, as a thing, making people sell it, keep it, buy it, own it for the sake of making a profit. The process of decommodifying that land and the housing within it means that the land and the uses on it are shielded from speculation, taking it off the private market and placing it into 99-year ground leases or deed restrictions. This process of removing land and buildings from the profit-driven market ensures permanent affordable housing to communities that have been historically marginalized due to income, status, race, and gender. Decommodification of land also ensures that communities can't actually get priced out of their own neighborhoods or evicted based on market influences. And while we focus so far on discussing creating affordable housing specifically within the community land trust, it's also a very flexible model. And so housing can be one component of decommodification, but it can also relate to creating community co-ops, daycare facilities, healthcare centers, community gardens, recreational and cultural facilities, and so many more things, so many more that would be community owned and run. The main point, however, of course, is that the community land trust retains ownership of the land and ensures it always serves a community purpose. And with that, we're very excited to announce that we are working on our first property acquisition and have recently, which is this, as you can see in the image, a brightly colored house on Reed Street, right near downtown. It's a fourplex where majority veterans who live with supporting housing vouchers live. The landlord actually approached us to sell the property, which is another example of the ways, differences amongst class solidarity can operate. And with this purchase, this home will be the first community-owned property under the CLT model in San Jose. Historically, this is the first one that we know of, at least. And very excitingly, last week on April 28th, we met our initial fundraising goal of $500,000 raised from the community, which takes us a very major step forward into acquiring this property. So we've been celebrating all week. We're very excited to move forward. And with that, I want to introduce you all in video form to one of the residents that actually lives in that house. Yeah, thanks. I think there's a room for cheering. One of the residents who lives in the house, who's been working with us closely, Tahari, and here are the words from him himself.
Yes, my name is Tahari Siani Benjamin Franklin. Born in Denver, Colorado in '75. I moved to California before I was 1 year old. My dad inherited a house here in Los Angeles. Moved there, moved to Northern California. After high school, went to the military. Spent 8 years, a little bit over 8 years in the United States Navy. But life happens. Sometimes, after I got out, made some good decisions, some bad decisions, and, became down and out. But being vet, there's services. There's a lot of services. And in anything that you do, no matter what you put in, you can get out. If you don't put in anything, you're not going to get anything out of it. And to where worked hard for it, and, did the things I was supposed to do. And now that I've been in my own place, I was homeless before, now I got my own place, and to be like what a lot of people take it for granted. Having their own, they might have had that their whole lives, never had to, scramble for food and things like that. They might have never had to live that life. But when you have, and then you start get your own. You start feeling more self-confident. You start getting self-esteem. You start getting self-worth back. And like I've been here for 2 years, and I ain't going nowhere. I just because it's the every month the stress of a lot of things. Once and the more and more of these type of programs that come out to help people like me, I would do it. And anything else that it's people looking out for people, and why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you try to help? Because one day it could be you, one day it could be your mom, one day it could be your sister or brother out there, your child. So, hey, let's, why live a life like we're bitter and not trying to help nobody, no heart, no, when there's joy, there's so much joy and happiness and, out there. And it's always good to help somebody. I know that there's never a time that you help somebody and then come back and feel bad about it, Yeah.
Thanks so much. I'm now going to pass it to Tao to introduce the community panel.
Thank you, Lila. That was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for guiding us in the art envisioning, as well as the introduction to the land trust. So now I'm going to introduce our panelists for today. Originally, we were going to have Tahari on the panel, but there was a last minute rescheduling of a surgery that he had to go into today at 2 p.m. So unfortunately, he couldn't be here for the panel. He would have loved to be here, but he couldn't. But we have some amazing folks on the panel today. First, I want to introduce Ayushi. Ayushi goes by she, her pronouns. Ayushi is a philanthropy advisor and organizer. She is a co-founder of the Freedom School for Healing and Justice in Philanthropy and stewards the Bay Area chapter of Resource Generation. She grew up in New Delhi, India, and currently lives in Hayward in the East Bay. We also have Jocelin Hernandez. Jocelin's pronouns are she, her, ella. Jocelin is a queer Salvadorian community organizer and educator who had dedicated herself to liberatory education and housing justice in the Bay Area. Jocelin is a founding member of the South Bay Community Land Trust and is a current board member as well. So give a warm welcome to our wonderful panelists today. So I'm going to start off with a couple of questions. First question, this one, we would like to have a sort of discussion with these questions between myself and the panelists. And then afterwards, there will be space for questions from the audience. If you have questions that you would like to type out, you can also do that. Jackie will be keeping track of those, and I'll be posing the questions that folks ask from the audience after the first few questions. So the first question is, the Land Trust vision is inclusive, collectively led and owned communities where everyone is safe, loved, and housed. What could community-led development look like? What excites you and or what feels challenging about community-led development? Jocelyn, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Tao. And thank you, everyone. For the question of what community-led development looks like, I think just following up with what Tahari mentioned of care and love, I envision community-led development as a powerful vehicle to create thriving and sustainable neighborhoods, as a lot of us envisioned earlier today. It can look so many different ways, but the vision that we are working towards is a community-led development that is truly, truly based in love. And it might sound so silly saying love, like, what is she talking about? What does love have to do with housing? But it has everything to do with it. If we truly practice loving our entire community, our development will reflect that. Currently, our development puts profit over people. And so we are comfortable evicting communities, we're comfortable displacing communities, dehumanizing communities for money. And so community-led development based in love can transform these practices and reimagine our relationship to one another, as so many of us discussed in our envisioning exercise. And so community-led development based in love would be one that could respect the humanity of folks living there, as well as the land, and taking care of our cities and communities, so we can be able to successfully pass it on to new generations. And so as the CLT, we really want to, our place in that is taking these land and buildings off the market, which has been so predatory to so many communities, and placing it in a trust so it can be permanently affordable. And we see that as an act of resistance and as an act of love. So that is what excites me the most and sustains me, the love that we have and the vision that we have. And that's also the most challenging part of our work, for folks to see housing and housing solutions and the housing crisis through a framework of love, through a framework of seeing that we are dealing with a broken housing system and that we need to be able to repair it in order to transform it. Thank you. I don't know if other folks share.
Yes to all of that. Thank you for the question, and thank you for having me here today. To add to that, I think when I envision community-led development, I think about self-determination, just being able to have a voice on things that affect you, affect your family, your neighborhood, your community. And of course, that's so exciting, because I don't know how many of us actually feel like we have autonomy and self-determination right now. I live in Hayward, I live in a suburb, and I have the homeowners association tell me what flowers I can plant in my front garden, and I'm not able to make such a simple decision about my home. And so many of us actually don't feel like we have influence over our communities and our neighborhoods. And so that's really exciting to think about the possibilities of community-led development and being able to shape your lives in such a real way. And then it's also, I think, really scary to think about that, because a lot of us don't have experience in community-led governance. It's not something that our schools or our workplaces are set up to accommodate. And so sometimes I feel like it's easier for me personally to be like, oh, I don't have to take responsibility for my life or for the people around me. And so I think community-led development, that can be the challenge of it, is it is an invitation to actually take responsibility for yourself and for the people around you, and to practice being in the messiness of collaborative decision-making, which again is something that so many of us have to learn. And then also, speaking from the perspective of philanthropy, it can be really scary for institutions like philanthropy, because if communities can take care of themselves, that means no one needs to be saved. And a lot of institutions kind of just need to be needed, again, especially in philanthropy. If people can self-determine, then we can't actually keep telling ourselves that we're so important and we're saving the world and we're so needed. So we have to kind of let go of our power, and our understanding of the world and our place in it falls away. And that can be really terrifying if you identify with that power so much. So that's speaking more from my place in philanthropy, of the tensions that come up when we hear community-led development. And then the really exciting invitation to think about, yeah, this is a responsibility that I have in my community. I get to shape these questions, and I get to figure out what this looks like for all of us.
Such amazing answers. Gives us a lot to think about in terms of taking power, giving power. And I really think back to, actually just yesterday, I was talking to Tahari, and we were asking him what his thoughts were once we shared that we finally met our fundraising goal. And part of his answer was that, he believes that the goal of the Community Land Trust is to help people feel again. And so I think that really relates to what Jocelyn was bringing up about love, and what you, Ayushi, were bringing up about feeling like, we can finally be involved and take responsibility and be a part of this community-led development. So thank you for your answers. The next question I have for y'all is, when it comes to solving the housing crisis, we often hear this narrative that there is a lack of housing and that we simply need to build more. How does the Community Land Trust's mission of preservation and decommodification of housing complicate that narrative and provide sustainable alternatives? Jocelyn, I'm going to start with you again.
Thank you so much, Tao. Thank you for this question. I think that is the objective of our event today, to share how the CLT model is a tool and vehicle to really transform and get to the root of this housing crisis. And so again, going back to the state of San Jose, to the state of South Bay, it is understanding that although there are many narratives that sometimes there's not enough housing, or sometimes there's too much housing, or whatever the case may be, really understanding that in the South Bay, we have an incredible amount of abundance, that there is an incredible amount of wealth that we can utilize today to really transform the city and really solve and end the housing crisis. And so that can only happen if we are able to sit with the discomfort of the legacy of racism and sexism in housing that impacts communities today. And this is a fact that we must surrender to, however uncomfortable. And to be able to have this understanding allows us then to create solutions that are transformative rather than reactive. It allows us to see things not in scarcity, but in abundance. And so right now in San Jose, for example, there's thousands of more vacant units than there are unhoused folks on the street. And so there is housing that we can mobilize and that we can acquire to be able to house the individuals that need housing now. And so we don't necessarily, by seeing San Jose or any city in the South Bay through a holistic lens, we're able to see where there is wealth and abundance to be able to transform our day-to-day. This 500,000 goal was testimony to that. We did not think that we would reach such a goal so quickly, but folks stepped up and were really committed to seeing a different vision of housing. And so a lot of the times when we look at affordable housing solutions, it is still within what we call the predatory market. It is still solutions that are within those, and those are an important intermediary, but it's also understanding that we want to eventually come out of that market and create a market that is centered on love again, so not on profit, but on love. And through the CLT, we see that we are a powerful tool that can be utilized to create permanent affordable housing. A lot of the times we create affordable housing and it's not sustainable, and many years from now, it increases again. But the CLT is unique, unlike any other model, in that it could create permanently affordable housing and decommodify housing. So it actually is honors housing as a human right rather than something to be sold. So again, this is going to require a lot of courage from us, and to really think about the visions that we thought about that we envision with one another, and to understand that to get to that vision, we're going to have to change the way that we think about a lot of things. I have had many years in many housing spaces and nonprofit spaces and with throughout San Jose, and oftentimes we are kind of scared to move forward because we want to go with the reasonable demand. But the reasonable demand will never get us to a place of transformation. And so looking at these solutions, we think that the foundational and one of the, this has to be included if we want to solve the housing crisis, is one, decommodifying housing, taking it out of this market that has oppressed communities for so long. Like, it just needs to go. It needs to go back into community hands so community can have voice. This, everybody has a part in this. And so that is the point of Lila's presentation, talking about restorative economics. We all have a part in this. We all have responsibility, and we all have these different ways that we're going to show up to be able to repair our very sick communities right now. So yes, decommodifying housing to create truly affordable housing is incredibly important in any solutions that we think of.
Yes, to all of that. And I see someone in the chat of housing is a human right, is a reasonable demand. So often what we're told we can imagine and ask for is conditioned, again, by these economic systems that we've grown up in. And so even being able to challenge that sometimes can feel really hard, and is work that we need to do as communities. But I really love also what you said about scarcity and abundance, Jocelyn, and the idea that we actually have everything that we need to take care of each other and to take care of ourselves. That scarcity as it exists in our economy is entirely manufactured can be a really hard one to sit with. The idea that we're worthy of being housed and sheltered just because we are alive, just because we are breathing. We have dignity because of that, can be really painful, I find, to sit with, because then we're forced to confront all of the ways that our systems have failed us, and these systems that have very real consequences on our lives, to actually be like, oh, they're made up. This economy is entirely made up, when so many of us have to make really big decisions about our lives based on finances, based on housing, especially here in the Bay. It can be really painful to sit with the grief of, oh, we've actually let each other down in this way. And then I also think about how our current economic system, of course, I feel like it would be hard to find a single person on a personal level who would say, I don't want people to be housed. But the economic system that we live in is kind of the result of the institutionalization of like human greed and power and scarcity. And this is what happens when these tendencies of ours get institutionalized and get so much bigger than any one of us, that they take on a life and a mind of their own. And so when we think about restorative economics or the CLT's vision, what I really love is that it's like trying to codify or institutionalize the best parts of being human. It's saying, we know that human beings are capable of being collaborative, of operating from a place of trust and respect for life and dignity. And it's really brave to believe in the best parts of humanity and to say we can actually run an entire economy based on that. And I know that a lot of people, when they hear about these concepts for the first time, they're like, that's incredibly naive. But I find it really just inspiring and cool to have a vision that asks that of us, that says we believe in ourselves as living creatures, as human beings, and we're asking this of each other. We're holding ourselves accountable to this vision, to the best part of what it means to be a living being and to be interdependent.
Once again, I am blown away by both of your answers, really sitting with the reframing that you provided, Jocelyn, and also the grief that you brought up, Ayushi, really sitting with that. I think sometimes when we start trying to explain the land trust to folks, it seems a bit complicated, right? But then for some reason, the current economic system where you work and most of your money goes to rent, and it goes to, and you don't ever end up owning that place that you rent. Like, that makes sense to people, right? And it makes sense because of all the violence that is behind that to enforce its reality. And so going back to the point that Jocelyn brought up about abundance and scarcity, the last question from me for y'all is, it is well known that we live in one of the richest yet unequal areas in the world. How can those with access to wealth engage in the CLT movement? I'm gonna start off with you, Ayushi.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I'm a member of the Bay Area chapter of Resource Generation, which is a national organization of young people ages 18 to 35 who have class privilege in some form, and who are committed to redistributing land, wealth, and power. And so class privilege can look like a lot of different things. It could be an inheritance, it could be excess income through your job, it could be having gone to an elite university or owning a home here in the Bay. And so often, especially in the Bay Area in RG, a lot of our families have made wealth through the speculative predatory housing market here. So in some cases, there's a direct connection between housing and extraction and personal wealth. And so the first thing I would say is to have people with wealth in any form kind of really interrogate the sources of that wealth and how that relates to our extractive economies, how that relates especially to predatory housing, and to take a really honest look at that, because so often we're actually not conditioned to talk about money in that way. We're not conditioned to really look critically at the sources of our wealth, especially in families with wealth. There's just a lot of isolation and taboo around talking about the sources. And then I would say also to understand that the CLT movement is not about helping those that don't have housing. It's not about saving communities. We all have a stake in the CLT movement. We all deserve to live in a world where we can be interdependent, where we can be self-determining. And so try to understand that perhaps by like visiting a land trust or visiting a community garden or some kind of restorative economics project to actually understand what are the costs of the ways that we are living today. What is the gap between the life that we are living currently and what is possible that the CLT visions are telling us is possible? So understanding that, I think, is really important to engage with the CLT movement. And then, of course, to redistribute wealth, actively move money to CLTs, your own wealth that you have access to organize your peers and your network to kind of share that this is a thing that is happening, this is a movement. Because I find so often that a lot of people don't think it's possible to have something like a community land trust. A lot of people don't think restorative economics is a possibility. And then beyond financial wealth, to think creatively about the land that you have access to. It's actually really exciting and cool. It's the possibilities that open up. Like if you own a home in the Bay Area, do you have a yard, like a cottage that you can offer up to communities that you can use creatively? Do you have a guest room? Do you have a second home or a vacation home? If you're elderly or aging, how might you think about handing over your house to a CLT? I think there was an article in the San Francisco Chronicle today actually about a woman who has given her home, I think, to the Marin Community Land Trust, who will take it over and steward it after she passes. And how can you set that up now? Can you share the material resources and the land that you have access to in really concrete ways with community, and not in the ways that we're just conditioned to think about property ownership as something that we have to hoard and hold on to?
Thank you, Ayushi. And yeah, just a couple of weeks ago, actually, Ayushi, along with other members of Bay Area Resource Generation, invited us to a community call with them. And it was beautiful and inspirational to see community step up and practice solidarity around class. And so most importantly, like initiating that space so we can come in and speak about the CLT. And, you know, we also learned how it is that they asked, how Barge asked amongst their membership to support and donate to our cause. So we're really thankful to them because I think that the irony exists that we're living in one of the richest areas of the world. And so it is to understand that we do have the money here to be able to transform. Like, that is just the fact of it. Like, we do have the abilities here and now, like Ayushi said. And of course, you know, I do want to take this moment to connect it to the city though, because I want to mention that all of these donations came from individual community donors. Folks from across the Bay stepped up and demonstrated that they are committed to this vision of the CLT. And that is something that we have not experienced in regards to the city. We have experienced a lot of doubt from the city, a lot of hesitancy, and overall, just like Ayushi was saying, just this disbelief that this can happen, that this can actually happen. And so, you know, regardless of whether we have their support or not, what we do have the support of very clearly is the community all across the South Bay. And so we know that we will definitely get to where our goals are, regardless of whether they are supporting or not. But we do want to voice that there's an opportunity for the city to step up and support this historic moment for San Jose. Like, this is not about the CLT. It is a historic moment for all of San Jose to be able to decommodify its first housing. A couple years back, we as San Jose voters voted in monies through Measure E for affordable housing and for preservation, rehabilitation, and acquisition. And unfortunately, that money is kind of has been sitting around while in this very critical time. And so we urge folks that are in housing spaces, who are policy advocate or, you know, self-proclaimed policy wonks, to really practice solidarity in the spaces that you are in beyond this one, and really help advocate for pressuring the city to be able to release those funds to the CLT and to other folks that are doing work, either providing direct services to unhoused folks or that are doing transformative housing work. And so we, I think in terms of our plan, we really want to show and share with the city the commitment and the support that we have garnered from our communities, to be able to encourage them that this is something that they can also invest in. So I you know, from the city and from the county, there are many opportunities. And for all of my colleagues who are in several different spaces, I encourage you to really share this word out, and to speak into existence the decommodification that we need in San Jose in order to end the housing crisis.
Thank you, y'all. And I also want to mention that after we celebrate this wonderful fundraising goal that we met this week, we'll be releasing a social media toolkit soon for folks to utilize in order to send emails to their city council member and the housing department to ask them, hey, maybe it's time to release that preservation funding and really invest in community-owned housing. Now I'm going to move on to questions from the audience. For this portion, I invite folks outside of the panel, those who are longtime volunteers, other staff members, board members of the Land Trust, if they feel called to answer these questions as well. I know y'all have been on the spotlight for a minute, and so if other folks that have been doing the Land Trust work want to answer, I invite y'all to answer these questions as well. So the first question, and it looks like this one was already answered in the chat. The CLT raised $500,000. Who were the major donors? And they were all individual donors. I think we had about 90 donors overall. And so, yeah, I hope that answers the question for that person. None of the money from the 500K came from the city or the county. The next question is, in CLTs, the community owns the land. Where does the money come from for routine home maintenance?
Sandy answered that in the chat.
Oh, yes. Okay. I'll just say it out loud. Hi, Sherry. CLT residents would continue to pay rent if they wish to remain renters. If they wish to own their units, they would continue to pay a house note. The difference is that the rents and housing costs would be lower and would be based on actual maintenance costs and repaying loans for acquisition and rehab, not for enriching speculators. The next question also looks like it was answered, but I'll just read it so that folks can hear it. How does a land trust determine how much the resident owners will pay since the market doesn't determine the price? Thank you, Sandy, for answering. Angie, rents would be determined based on paying the cost of the housing so that the CLT would break even. Since it is a nonprofit, it would not set rents based on the market, since the market rents are completely unaffordable and are based on maximizing profits, not on meeting people's needs. All right, let me see if there are other questions in the chat. Okay. Question, being that many of us do not have experience with collective ownership, how do we support people to be ready for that role?
That is a beautiful question. It is really going to be the community organizing that we do together and the collective learning that we continue to do beyond this space. The CLT, we were formed and founded out of a grassroots community organization called Serve the People. And so that has always and continues to be one of our greatest strengths. And so part of our, as a community land trust, it is not just about acquiring properties and, the real estate and acquisition, but it's also about organizing and building up that community. For right now, in this moment, Reed Street, it just doesn't involve the house, it involves the entire neighborhood. And so the entire neighborhood is part of this collective learning that we want to share with everyone. And so we will be having an event at the in June with members of the Reed Street neighborhood to talk about collective ownership, to talk about more about the CLT model.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Nasim asked a question in the chat. How does Alex Lee's bill AB 2053 affect the work SBCLT does?
Jackie, Sandy, would anybody like to take those?
I can address that. The AB 2053 is a bill to support social housing and the development of social housing in California, and it kind of complements the work of CLTs. It's not meant to replace CLTs, and it's not meant to make CLTs unnecessary. It's just to get the state involved in building housing. And I know some of our organizations have supported that. I think South Bay CLT is on record as supporting it. But there are some concerns out there that, as written, it doesn't make enough, it doesn't have enough ability to get funding to make sure that the rents are going to be low income and extremely low income. So I think that's a concern. And as the bill goes forward, we'd have to keep an eye on that situation, because it could conceivably, if it goes into developments that are primarily market rate, it could conceivably actually make displacement worse. And obviously that's not something that we want, even though it would be a nonprofit housing, government housing, which is positive. But if it's not done right and it's not done properly and it ends up displacing people, we're not helping ourselves.
Thank you, Sandy. Sandy, did you want to introduce? Okay, thank you, Jackie. Sandy Perry is a board member of the South Bay Community Land Trust and longtime housing advocate and organizer.
Okay.
So another question here from Charlotte. By the way, if you have questions, you don't always have to put them in the chat. Feel free to unmute as well. But I'm going to go ahead and read this question from Charlotte. Does the CLT foresee obtaining properties that are not residential?
I think that we have, in many of our own envisioning sessions in the past, throughout the years, we have really wanted to exercise the flexibility of the CLT model. As the CLT model, as you know, can acquire lands, housing, commercial buildings, and everything in between. And so we, in our envisioning exercises, kind of very much aligned to the envisioning. We want to be able to center food sovereignty. We want to be able to center permanently affordable commercial spaces. Oh my gosh, never hear about that, but permanently affordable commercial spaces and spaces that are able to be used by the community. That would be more from communal, commercial use, gardens. These are all things that in our future we foresee and want to include as we grow the CLT. And to David's question, there has been a long history, yes, in the CLT movement and an even longer one across the globe. And so currently in the United States, there's about probably a little more than 10,000 units that are CLTs. And again, I know that, you know, in comparison to the entire housing market, we are a small margin of it. But one thing that I really love to share with folks is the impact of these CLTs. And we can definitely share out a report. But in a Homes for All report, they calculated the stability and the permanence of housing during the 2008 crisis. And we were able to see that for individuals living in the CLT, not one house was like lost. Again, because folks that were living in the CLT were not experiencing the predatory loan that, you know, impacted others and then eventually made them lose their housing. And so in terms of number, in terms of scale, of course, it is a movement that we hope to grow. But in terms of like the legacy of the permanence and the legacy of the impact, we already are seeing how it just like completely blows out the water, the current housing market model that we have right now.
Question from Amber. Are there any federal or government sources of funding for CLT yet, or policy to get government funding or support, like tax credits for affordable housing or bond funds? Well, I could answer. There's one policy that folks are pushing for in San Jose. It's called the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act. And what COPA would do is it would allow tenants and qualified nonprofits the right to make the first offer to buy a property that goes on sale. And they would be backed up by some funding from the city. This policy already exists in Washington, D.C. and San Francisco, where San Francisco provides COPA $10 million a year. And so that is one example of a policy, and I'm sure there are many more if other folks want to speak about them.
I can also say that there was actually funding for CLTs in the Build Back Better bill, but people, I think everybody knows what happened to that one, unfortunately. So there's a lot of people that would like to see a lot of federal funding for CLTs, but it doesn't exist yet.
Any other answers to Amber's question? Any other questions from the audience? Wonderful. Thank you, y'all. That was a wonderful discussion. I hope folks learned a lot and had a lot to think about. Yeah. Wonderful questions. Jackie, could you bring up back the slides so we can continue and close out the presentation? So in spirit of what we just brought up, we wanted to do the solidarity exercise with y'all, inspired by Barge, the group that Ayushi is from. And Ayushi and Mohit actually came up with these questions in the community call, and it was very powerful. The question is, what is an amount that you could move to SBCLT right now? And even though we've met our fundraising goal, we're going to create a general preservation fund for more properties to come. In fact, we're working on acquiring an 18-unit property in the historic Mayfair neighborhood on the East Side right now. And so, yeah, and to grow our edges, what is an amount you could move to the land trust now that feels a little uncomfortable? Can you go with that amount? And we have our Venmo, Cash App, PayPal, if you want to mail checks, or if you have an employer that may match your donation, that information is right there on the screen. And if you want to be held accountable to your commitment, you can also put your commitment into the chat. So we're just going to give folks a couple of minutes to do that right now. To answer Nasim's question, we're going to try to upload it to our website. We have the CLT 101 on there, so we'll upload it to a website and then send it out to folks. Jackie, are you working on putting the payment methods in the chat? Yes. And then if we pay via Venmo, can we get a receipt? Yes, definitely send us an email. It's going to be on the next slide, and we can make sure to screenshot it and send it back to you. Thank you, Amber. So while we work to get the, thank you, Nasim. Thank you so much for your donation, for your pledge. And while we work to get the payment method links in the chat, we also appreciate y'all coming to us as whole people. There are so many other ways to support the work. You can reach out to us via the platforms on the screen, whether that be email, our website, our Instagram, Facebook. We also have general monthly meetings on the 4th Thursdays of every month at 5 p.m. You're also more than welcome to join us there. There's also a link on the slide that will be posted in the chat if you want to sign up for our mailing list and or find out ways to volunteer. Usually when you fill this out, we'll reach out to you, try to do a one-on-one, see where your interests are and how you can get involved. Or if you just want to stay on the mailing list, that's totally fine too. But we invite folks to support us in many different ways. Thank you, Charlotte. And thank you to you too, Danielle. Make sure this is in the chat. Give me 1 second to get the payment methods into the chat. Awesome. All right. Next slide, please, Jackie. Thank you everyone for attending today. We thank you so much for your support, especially if you were part of the donation drive that took place in the past couple months. We are so grateful. We hope that you learned a lot from this space, that you're able to connect with some of us and others. Since we've recorded this, we'll definitely upload it and send it out to folks. So thank you again, and I hope everybody has a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.